Wyatt Earp was many things in his life. A lawman, certainly, but also a gambler, a saloon keeper, and brothel owner. But before all of that, he was a young boy in Iowa who watched his older brothers James and Virgil and half-brother Newton go off to fight for the Union in the Civil War. Wyatt tried later to run off and join the army as well, but his father found him and dragged him back home. In 1869, Wyatt took his first job as a lawman, replacing his father as a constable in Lamar, Missouri. He married Uriah Sutherland soon after being elected to that post, but his wife died, probably of typhoid fever, within a year. In the years after Uriah's death, Wyatt's life was unstable. He was accused of fraud in Lamar and skipped town before that could be resolved. He was accused of horse theft in Indian Territory, present-day Oklahoma, along with another man. His alleged partner was acquitted, but Earp never went to trial. From this distance in time, it is difficult to know what happened, but clearly, Wyatt's life was going in the wrong direction. His next destination was Peoria, Illinois, where he seems to have been an enforcer in a brothel house, getting arrested on multiple occasions. He may have done some buffalo hunting around this time as well. In 1874, he moved to Wichita, Kansas, where his older brother Jim and his wife Bessie ran a saloon and brothel house. He may have helped keep the rough customers in line for his brother and sister-in-law, and he also may have done some work dealing cards in the saloon. But his life started turning around after Wyatt helped an off-duty policeman recover a stolen wagon. He got some good publicity out of this, and in 1875, he was officially hired as a deputy marshal in Wichita. Wyatt was a big man for the time and strong. By all accounts, he was a respected officer in Wichita, helping to keep the peace. Not long after, he drifted to Dodge City, which was very much in need of good peace officers. Dodge City was a cattle town, like Wichita and Abilene, and in 1876, it was the busiest. Wyatt joined other lawmen there, including the Masterson brothers, James, Ed, and William Barclay Masterson, better known as Bat. Bat and his brothers were buffalo hunters turned lawmen. In June 1874, 20-year-old Bat was one of 28 men at the trading post of Adobe Walls, who fought off a 4-day siege by hundreds of Comanche warriors.
The Kansas buffalo hunters invaded the Texas Panhandle in force in the spring of 1874. In 5 months, it is said they slew 100,000 bison. The deserted Adobe Walls was selected as the rendezvous for these hunters, who came from Dodge City, 175 miles away. The Indians formed a gorgeous and spectacular cavalcade. They rode 900 strong. The picked men of the Comanche, Kiowa, Shawnee, and Arapaho nations, the finest horsemen on earth, the best cavalry that ever went to battle. Glistening with war paint and decked in his battle raiment, every Indian believed that he galloped to certain victory. 45 caliber Colts were frequent. Winchester rifles and Spencer carbines were seen on every side, and sometimes Sharp's rifles. At their head rode the Comanche, Quayna Parker. Fort Dodge, Dodge City, and Safety were 175 miles to the northeast, 1,200 yards across, carpeted with high blue stem, curtained by the breaks of the Canadian. The little valley of Adobe Walls furnished the buffalo hunters with an ample, sufficient, and glorious amphitheater for their fight against the odds of 30-1. Over near Langston's, Tom Keefe's little dog licked his face and awakened him to observe a herd of buffalo coming. Keefe lay on his elbows to watch them. As they walked out into the grass, Watson and Og glanced towards the herd, and suddenly, from the throat of one of the two came an appalling cry. The discovered Indians answered with the war whoop. The advancing herd of buffalo was transformed into a pack of yelling, screeching Indian demons. The hunters outside fired one volley and retreated within when the Indians were within 100 yards.
The defenders were spread out in the 3 main buildings of the settlement. 2 of the buildings had adobe walls 2 feet thick. The third had 10-inch thick wooden walls. Those strong walls would be tested, as the hunters were very nearly wiped out in the first assault.
Again and again the Indians dashed against the doors of the building in the endeavor to break them down. Running at full speed, they hurled their horses against the defenses, or, whirling, backed them against the doors, hoping their weight would force an entrance. Long after the sun had risen in the heavens, they continued. 20 braves dismounted and attempted to rush the door. The fire from Langston's and the crossfire from Hanrahan's, where Dixon and Masterson had secured an advantageous position.
Despite their numbers, the defenders were able to use their superior weaponry, including a stock of Sharp's rifles and ammunition in the trading post, to hold the attackers at bay for several days. By the 4th day,
over 100 hunters had crowded into adobe walls from surrounding territories. For a number of days they were surrounded, and the firing continued. But finally, the Indians withdrew. And on the morning of July 14th, the hunters marched out from Dodge City, which they reached July 27th.
The battle would have dire repercussions for the Southern Plains tribes. It would lead to the Red River War, a series of mostly smaller skirmishes between the U.S. Army and the Comanche, Kiowa, Southern Cheyenne, and Arapaho tribes, resulting in their forcible relocation to Indian Territory. Bat Masterson served as a scout for the Army during some of those campaigns. A few years later, Bat Masterson was in Dodge City. Dodge needed tough lawmen who could handle a rough crowd of cowboys without having to shoot them. The cowboys were both the lifeblood of the town and the bane of its existence. The town needed them living and at liberty so that they could buy drinks and lose their money to the card dealers. But the wild behavior of the cowboys kept the town from being respectable and was likely to get someone killed. On June 9th, 1877, the Dodge City Times announced, regarding Bat Masterson's brother Ed,
Dodge City Times, June 9, 1877. Ed Masterson had been appointed Assistant Marshal of this city. He is not very large, but there are not many men who would be anxious to tackle him a second time. He makes a good officer.
It wouldn't be long before Bat joined his brother Ed as a lawman in Dodge. But at this point, in the very same issue of the Times announcing Ed's appointment, a second article featured Bat in a somewhat different light.
Last Wednesday was a lively day for Dodge. 200 cattlemen in the city. The gang in good shape for business. Merchants happy and money flooding the city is a condition of affairs that could not continue in Dodge very long without an eruption. And that is the way it was last Wednesday. Robert Gilmore was making a talk for himself in a rather emphatic manner, to which Marshal Larry Degger took exceptions and started for the doghouse with him. Bobby walked very much leisurely, so much so that Larry felt it necessary to administer a few paternal kicks in the rear. This act was soon interrupted by Bat Masterson, who wound his arm affectionately around the marshal's neck and let the prisoner escape. Degger then grappled with Bat, at the same time calling upon the bystanders to take the offender's gun and assist in the arrest. Joe Mason appeared upon the scene at this critical moment and took the gun. But Masterson would not surrender yet, and came near getting hold of a pistol from among several which were strewed around over the sidewalk. But half a dozen Texas men came to the marshal's aid and gave him a chance to draw his gun and beat Bat over the head until the blood flew. Bat Masterson seemed possessed of extraordinary strength, and every inch of the way was closely contested. But the city dungeon was reached at last. If he had got hold of his gun before going in, there would have been a general killing. Ed Masterson accomplished his first official act in the arrest of Bobby Gilmore the same afternoon. Next day, Judge Frost administered the penalty of the law by assessing 25 in costs to Bat, 10 to Norton, and 5 to Bobby. The boys are all at liberty now.
Bobby Gilmore was a small man, whereas Marshal Larry Deeger was upwards of 300 pounds. Bat couldn't stand seeing the marshal manhandling the little man. The mayor must have sympathized somewhat, because a month later, he remitted $10 of Bat's fine. And the town in general must have felt good about that, because just a month after the incident, Bat Masterson was appointed undersheriff of Ford County, which included Dodge, by Sheriff Charlie Bassett. Right around that same time, Wyatt Earp returned to Dodge City. He had worked the previous cattle season as a lawman in Dodge, spring and summer 1876, and had left for some months to go to Deadwood. Wyatt moved around quite a bit, but his return was clearly welcome, based on a July 7, 1877 notice in the Times.
Wyatt Earp, who was on our city police force last summer, is in town again. We hope he will accept a position on the force once more. He had a quiet way of taking the most desperate characters into custody, which invariably gave one the impression that the city was able to enforce her mandates and preserve her dignity. It wasn't considered policy to draw a gun on Wyatt unless you got the drop and meant to burn powder without any preliminary talk.
But Wyatt apparently didn't take the post right away, based on a report a few weeks later.
Miss Frankie Bell, who wears the belt for superiority in point of muscular ability, heaped epithets upon the unoffending head of Mr. Earp to such an extent as to provoke a slap from the ex-officer, besides creating a disturbance of the quiet and dignity of the city, for which she received a night's lodging in the doghouse and a reception at the police court next morning, the expense of which was about $20. Wyatt Earp was assessed the lowest limit of that law, $1.
The exact cause of the fight between Wyatt and the muscular prostitute has been lost to time, but the incident highlights the rough nature of the town and the times. And the town fathers couldn't have found it too worrisome a story, because Wyatt was in fact hired on as an assistant marshal.
Thanks for watching. If you'd like to help us produce more compelling historical content like this, please like, comment below, and share this video with fellow history buffs. And of course, be sure to subscribe to help keep history happening.